Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more HOA stories. In this video, an HOA president vandalized my truck and had it towed away to get it totally destroyed. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled Insane Homeowner Association. So I lived in this town surrounded by magnificent vistas. There was a small development on the outskirts for upscale homes and mansions. Below the development were a few older homes. Many celebrities and business owners had vacation properties in the area, multi-million-dollar houses they used maybe 1 month out of the year. Real estate had always been at a premium. There was one older home amongst all these giant view lots. A new buyer was a guy who owned a slew of RV dealerships and had obscene amounts of money, so he bought the most prominent lot on the top of the hill as you entered the development of maybe 20 lots. His project was a massive stucco structure with a multi-car garage and a much bigger RV storage space with a huge roll-up garage door. Think of the biggest RVs you have seen, and he had a garage built for it with an automatic door. The house was a nondescript sand color with a red-tiled roof, and the entire lot was tastefully landscaped with different kinds of rocks, small mounds here and there, and a few shrubs to be low maintenance. The back of the property was fenced in with an 8-foot or so or higher block wall. The fence itself probably cost $100,000. His neighbor was a school teacher who had lived there before the development started and had a modest house. He decided to take advantage of the skyrocketing land prices in the neighborhood and sell, except no one wanted his crappy house when there were much larger empty lots available. He decided the real issue was that the new behemoth blocked his view. And that is why no one wanted to buy his 3-bedroom ranch house at mansion prices. It was really that his home didn't appeal to the market. So he became the president of the HOA, which included the older homes and the new development. And then the harassment started. The HOA had formed after the RV mansion construction had begun, but the home was so big it took almost a year to finish. The HOA had passed a design theme rule that all houses must be painted in a specific color palette, with the predominant color being a taupe that was darker than this man's standard beige stucco color house. The palette included a taupe and a selection of trim colors in pink, teal or tan. It was intended to give the community a Santa Fe look and feel, which just happened to be the colors of the president's crappy house. The RV owner took the HOA to court and the trial dragged on for a year. The guy never used the property, claiming it was still under construction during this time. He lost in court and had to repaint his property using only the design theme approved colors. So basically, the guy brought out his contractor and had him repaint the entire property the Pepto-Bismol pink trim color. Everything was painted this color: the house, the fence, the trim and the rocks in the yard, and then he had the massive driveway to the garage done in the same pink stamped concrete. Even the garage doors were pink. He locked up the house and never stayed there. The HOA was in an uproar because this house could be seen at the top of the hill for miles. None of the other lot owners broke ground. The president's home did not sell for 2 years. And now let's move on to the HOA title story. And by the way, please let me know in the comments whether you still enjoy the HOA stories, because if yes, I will of course continue with them as usual. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and maybe even like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. So this incident happened in January of this year. Last year I moved into a neighborhood with an optional HOA. At the time, I had come into enough money to buy a house outright. The only reason I moved here is because the HOA was optional and it's a nice, safe neighborhood. It's a slice of heaven compared to where I used to live. I own 2 vehicles, a 2004 Toyota Camry and a 1999 Ford F-150. The Camry is my daily driver, while the F-150 is my hauler for when I need it. I bought the truck around the same time I bought the house to help with the move, and I used it to pull a rented trailer when I was moving my stuff in. The F-150 is old but in good mechanical order, and I try to keep both of my vehicles clean with monthly trips through a car wash. The local HOA didn't like me from the start due to my refusal to join. The HOA president was a retired old man who seemed like he had nothing better to do. So he tried multiple times to sell me on joining and sent me several applications in the mail. But I always declined, politely at first, but when the president got more aggressive, I told him to shove it where the sun doesn't shine. That is when the HOA decided that I was a member anyway, and started sending me fines in the mail with that claim. I knew they were bogus, so I went to the next HOA meeting to dispute the fines. They tried to tell me that by living here, I am in the HOA automatically whether I liked it or not. This was an obvious power move and something I was ready for. I could only laugh in amazement of their stupidity and said as much to them. Then told the board that not only was I not a member, but I'd gotten a lawyer to write up a C&D for them. I handed the envelope over, the board skimmed it and then furiously told me to get out. The fines stopped for a few months and then started right back up again at random. So I popped into another HOA meeting and told them this was not legal and I'm not in their HOA and I would take them to court if they didn't stop this. And once again I was furiously told to get out. The fines stopped for good, but the HOA president decided I needed to be made an example of. It happened only a few days later. I came home to find my F-150 gone from my driveway. I checked my cameras and saw the HOA president himself walk onto my property. He basically took out a pocket knife and stabbed each of my truck's tires in the sidewalls and then unscrewed the license plates off, put them in a bag and just casually walked away with them. Then, a little while later, a tow truck came and hauled my truck away. I called the police and together we went to see the HOA president, but he was not home. With my situation explained, this was not considered a civil matter, but actually grand theft auto. The police traced the tow truck as being from a local junkyard and not from an impound lot. I accompanied the police there. Not only was the HOA president present at the junkyard, but my F-150 was there, being taken apart by about 4 men. They had already removed the headlights, hood, bumper, radiator and all of the panels off the front of the truck by the time we had gotten there. There was stuff disconnected all over the engine bay and the catalytic converters had already been cut out. The HOA president looked like a deer in headlights when he saw me there with police. I was nearly angry beyond words when I saw my truck in that condition. Nearly, I say, because I went off like a foul-mouthed country sailor on the people who had ripped my truck apart. The HOA president was caught red-handed but insisted he had only towed my truck because it was in a sorry state and looked abandoned. I said he illegally took it off my private property since the HOA had no right to tow it off my land and he clearly had not been aware of my cameras as they had seen everything he did. He went pale at first and then furiously tried to stomp towards me, looking like he was ready for a fight while yelling my truck had been an eyesore, so he got rid of it. This action earned him some new bracelets and a free ride to the station. The police were somewhat merciful to the junkyard staff who claimed to have only been doing their jobs. The owner of the junkyard is a cousin to the HOA president, so then he was contracted to do any towing for the HOA since he also owned a local impound. He had no idea that I was not a member of the HOA and also was not aware his cousin had ordered his employees to tear my truck apart for parts as an abandoned vehicle. The police cited all sorts of broken laws to the employees and owner, and then they agreed to put my truck back together. But I said that it had better be at least as good as it was, if not better, or I would be going to my lawyer. The owner told his employees to do whatever it takes, or he would separate them from their jobs. Then told me he would bill the HOA president for everything later. Then the police and I got to watch as all of those employees had to painstakingly put my truck back together piece by piece. And they repeatedly muttered things about me to each other and flashed me the stink eye from time to time. I'm guessing the HOA president offered to bribe them all to take my truck apart as quickly as possible. But now they had to fix it for free and they were at it for hours. They had to weld the catalytic converters back in and even had to replace some parts entirely due to damage caused during hasty disassembly. When they first fired up the engine, it had an obvious misfire. They denied it, but police sided with me that they could tell it had a misfire too. Turns out they ruined one of the coil packs taking the truck apart and they had to order new parts from a nearby auto parts store to fix it. One of the headlights also stopped working. Again, something that they had to fix because I stated I could prove with my home cameras that they were both working when I last drove it, and the bulbs were nearly brand new LEDs, so they had to have broken something there too. The coolant lines had also been just cut instead of simply disconnected, probably because they were trying to take the truck apart in a hurry. So those were more parts that had to be ordered from the nearby store as well. I can only imagine the total cost that was billed to the HOA president for this. All 4 of the tires had to be replaced because they were not repairable. So then they had to leave the truck on a lift and take all 4 wheels off. There were other problems too, and all of these junkyard mechanics had to work overtime to put the truck back together on the hopes that I would not sue or press charges. I was not even able to take the truck home till the next day evening, because the police had to get my plates back and the junkyard staff had to take the wheels in for new tires. By the time I got the truck back, the 2 junkyard employees I saw there gave me looks that just said not to come back. And the truck actually runs better than before, so I essentially got a free sort of overhaul for my trouble. As for the HOA president, and well, I did sue him for trespassing, theft, destruction of property and the illegal tow. He ended up paying his cousin for all of my truck repairs, lost his position in the HOA and moved out of the neighborhood shortly after, losing the lawsuit because he had no leg to stand on in court since everything was caught on CCTV. He pretty much surrendered to the asked for settlement, which is why it did not get drawn out. The HOA hasn't bothered me at all since the truck incident. Also, my neighbors love me for getting rid of the old HOA president, as he was a power-tripping narcissist to them all and kept issuing pointless fines that had to be regularly disputed. Also, I've been back to that junkyard for parts, but for my Camry instead, as I went to pull a replacement grille for it and found one in excellent shape there. They did recognize me and of course gave me dirty looks, but otherwise did not bother me. Update to the story: some months ago I wrote about how the volunteer HOA in my neighborhood tried to force me to join and then told me I was a member whether I liked it or not. I only moved here because the HOA was explicitly stated to be voluntary only, but that was just to lure people in. Once here, the HOA would try to act like you remember and then demand you pay them. This is what they tried with me, but I confronted them in their own meetings twice about it. The first time I gave them a C&D, and the second time it was an all-out threat to sue. That is when the board finally took me seriously, but the HOA president had a serious chip on his shoulder and couldn't let it go, so he vandalized my truck and had it taken away to a junkyard. So anyway, now that you're up to date, here's what happened. The HOA board decided to wait until the next election to replace the president, but until then the HOA itself were still the power-tripping fat cats they were before, just a man short. They were leaving me alone though. But the other people in the neighborhood not so much. I was not the only one in the neighborhood not legally signed onto the so-called volunteer HOA, and the others who were being forced to pay despite lack of membership followed my example and stopped all payment and then threatened to sue. There was some blowback from the board, like them saying that having paid anything to the HOA made them members. They countered with asking where the application they had signed were. Of course there weren't any. The board was losing power and finally made it obvious how much they hated it. Finally though, the board elections were coming and the board basically pleaded with the neighborhood in various ways that things don't change aside from a new president being elected. There was strong suspicion these people were lining their own pockets with HOA money, so they were given an option of surrender. They refused and tried to keep their positions, but were all voted out. They didn't leave the board willingly, as they demanded an open recount of the ballots, which showed that almost nobody voted for them. So they claimed the votes had been rigged against them and demanded a redo vote with a different system. Someone pointed out that they were just stalling for time by saying the voters cheated somehow, and then someone suggested a majority vote by hand raising at the meeting, and that showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the old fat cats were voted out. I heard they chastised everyone that they would destroy the neighborhood as they packed their stuff and left. The newly elected board and president then filed a motion to dissolve the volunteer HOA entirely. And the old fat cats were some of the only ones who voted against it. There were also a few older residents who also tried to vote against it, but the majority more than had it enough. The motion passed and the volunteer HOA was shut down. There was no investigation for embezzlement though. However, my neighbors did not seem to care to get one started now that the HOA was disbanded. Personally, I would have moved forward with one, but I was not an HOA member, just a guy with popcorn on the sidelines. Since the disbandment around 2 months ago, at least 3 of the houses in the neighborhood have already been repainted in colors previously not approved. One of the former board members had put his house up for sale, and the fat cats have gotten a little slimmer, if you get my meaning. The house that had been rented out for the HOA office building was also sold to a new family that moved in. Just about everyone here is so much happier, except the fat cats and their very few supporters. The most power they have left is to yell at people to get off their lawns now. And they seem to spend the bulk of their time either hiding at home or at their wine club. And yes, I found out that they have a wine club. It really didn't surprise me much. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I'm very happy with this outcome of this HOA story for OP. And of course for the entire neighborhood. It's always good to see these power-hungry tyrants being removed from their positions. Seriously, there are few things as satisfying as seeing an HOA getting dismantled. Then again guys, I'm curious, have you ever dealt with homeowner associations yourself? And if so, how has been your experience? Was it positive or negative? By the way, a little update here from my side. I've told you guys like months before that we had an HOA meeting in the neighborhood because apparently Thai people are now also interested in HOAs, and it has been a few months now. And also there has been another meeting recently, but to be honest, there have been a few issues in the neighborhood, such as people not really taking care of the dogs constantly barking, some people parking exceptionally stupid, but in true Thailand fashion, of course also the HOA is not really enforcing their rules at all. I suppose for better or worse. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I moved out the second I turned 18. For the entirety of my life up to that point, things have been unfair. Specifically, things have been unfair with my sister. My mother clearly favored her more, other than the bare necessities I would pay for all of my own stuff. Which would be fine if she also hadn't forced me to give her every penny from the job I had from age 16. I had a room, but it was down in the basement, always cold and damp, and most of my belongings would get moldy or ruined in some way. My sister, however, lived in my parents' old room and was showered with anything she wanted, even if my mom could not really afford it. But after all, the money they were spending was mine. My father left not long after I was born, which is partially why I was not treated well. They thought it was my fault that he was gone. But when I turned 18, I got a letter in the door from him. I hid it before opening it. It was a check for $20,000. I was shocked. I packed up everything I owned, which was not a lot, hailed a cab and left. With the money, I was able to rent a small apartment in the city nearby. I did not know what my plan was, but I knew anything from now would be better. I got in contact with my dad and he had told me that my mom had become abusive towards him and he had to leave. When he tried getting custody of me and my sister, she pressed countless charges on him, which resulted in a restraining order. For the next 2 years, I heard nothing from my sister or mother and continued to work on myself and kept in contact with my dad. I saw him as regularly as I could. I ended up saving a lot of money and buying a beautiful farm property near a river a couple of miles away. I've always dreamed of living on and owning a farm. Don't get me wrong, it was hard work, but I loved it so much. My dad loved it too, and he came to stay all the time, which was amazing because as our relationship grew, I realized what a great man he was. Who knows how he ended up with my mother. Cutting straight to the point of this, one afternoon I got a knock on my door, and the moment I opened it, my sister and mother burst into the house, said house being the farmhouse, which was rather large and already furnished, and my sister exclaimed, "Oh wow, this will be perfect," slamming the door behind her. "Isn't it lovely?" my mother asked her. Neither of them had glanced over at me yet. "It will need a good dusting, but yes, I think it's great. And we will remove all the animals, of course. Their fields will make an amazing golf course." My sister began wandering around, smudging her finger on things to check for dust. Hello? I asked. "Hello, my dear," my mother replied, not looking at me as she continued perusing the house. "Why are you here?" I asked. Clearly I was going to have to spoon-feed them for answers. "Your sister is gonna be staying here." My mother glanced at me and then with little emotion in the face. "Oh, is she? And why is that?" I once again asked. "I'm pregnant and I'm not raising my gorgeous baby in the small grovel we live in at the moment. So I will move in here and you can move back home or something." My sister was the one to reply this time. No, he will have to go elsewhere," my mother responded, shooting my sister a glare. "Yeah, whatever." My sister rolled her eyes. It was news to me that she was pregnant, but I was not surprised. She always got everything she wanted and was not the sharpest tool in the box, so I doubt she ever bothered with contraceptives. "You are not gonna be living here, this is my house." "Honestly, how did you even find me?" I moved closer to them. "What do you mean, she cannot live here? She is your sister, and we found where you lived through your Instagram." My mom had taken a step back. "She has not been my sister for the past 3 years, where she never made an attempt to contact me. And you're not even asking for one, nor if she can stay in a room for 2. You're just demanding I give her my whole property. No way." "Brother, you cannot do this to me." I am pregnant and need somewhere to raise this baby. You have to give me your house. My sister stamped her feet as she said this. She might be 27, but she was still so immature. I had enough of your brattish attitude when I lived at home. You're not bringing it here. You have never done anything for me, so why in my right mind would I give you my house which I paid in full for? Because… My sister started wailing. Son, don't be rash. Just hand over the keys and be on your way. My mother gave me her classic scolding look. Get out before I call the cops. I ground out through my teeth. I couldn't believe that cheek they had. You would call the cops on your family? My mother was aghast. She was currently rubbing circles on my sister's back. No, of course not, but you two are just a pair of random wenches who entered my home without permission. Now go! I pointed to the door. After a little more back and forth, they finally left, shouting insults at me as they went through the threshold. I was fuming. I thought I had escaped those tyrants, and although I knew one day we would meet again, I hoped it wouldn't be so soon, and certainly not under such circumstances. I rang my dad and told him everything that had happened, and he immediately packed up some of his things and came over, telling me he would stay with me and so be here if they decided to show up once more. And yes, they did show up again, but not in the same way as before. Me and my dad had decided the next day to go out for a meal to take our minds off of things, and when we got back we saw that the windows to my house were smashed in and the lock to the door was broken. We heard voices inside, but before going in, we called the police and waited for them to get there. We explained that we had just gotten back and this was the state the house was in, and soon they were inside. This is the police, come out with arms raised. The culprits came out of their hiding spots alright, and although I kind of had a feeling it was them, it still shocked me when they came out sheepishly holding up their hands. What's going on? I was trying to have a bath in my new home, my sister screeched. Did you do this damage? One officer asked, pointing at the windows and door. We had to. We hadn't been left a key, my mother responded, as if that would explain and sort out everything. So you don't own this house? The officer asked. Well, not officially. But my daughter lives here now, and my son bought this house, but she's pregnant, so you see, she deserves the space more. I'm sure you understand. This is all a big misunderstanding. My mother gave them her sweetest smile. The officers looked between each other. You're joking, right? No, I'm absolutely not. Now, I gather you have the power to force him to hand over the keys, etc. And what are you doing here? She had just spotted my father. We were having a meal. I'm staying here with him for a bit after he told me how you barged in and started claiming rights to his home. She suddenly took off running and was about to lunge at my dad when an officer caught him. This man ruined my career. And he created 2 spoiled rotten children for me to deal with. Mom, I'm not spoiled, I'm pregnant, my sister wailed. The officers got my mom in handcuffs and led my sister outside, and they were both placed into the cop car. The officers then came over and asked if I wanted to press charges for the damages, which I did. So then I pressed charges for the damages to the house and the emotional stress they caused. All in all, they had to pay a fine for damaging my house and property, and of course they ended up behind bars for a while, which I appreciated. Some of you might be asking how my sister did considering that she was pregnant. Well, it turned out she lied about that too. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.